Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Hannah Braderud.
And I'm Luke Freeman. And today we have three amazing guests on the podcast. And we are recording live from the Casino Cash Trac Connect conference, user conference. Is that right, Kurt? Am I getting it right? Okay. And in Durant, Oklahoma, and wrapped the conference just a few minutes ago. And the final session of the conference was the four of you sharing about connection and why connection is important when we're thinking about change for organizations, whether that's a technology project or any sort of change initiative. And so the things that you had to share were really insightful. I love the different perspectives that everyone came with. And so today we're going to dig into that. But first, I'm going to introduce our guests. Maybe I skipped over that, so I'll go back. So we've got Kurt Williams, CEO and co-founder of Casino Cash Trac, which is a casino vertical data company. And I would love to hear more about that in a little bit. And then Chas Robbins, who is with RSM. He's the national leader for gaming and hospitality, and has some awesome experience in consulting in the gaming hospitality industry, obviously. And really, I think, shared some cool insights about change, how we think about change, how we help leadership teams move through change and navigate change. And Debbie Hawkins, who is a partner with Hawkins Consulting Services, hospitality strategist and business architect, and super excited to have all of you with us today. Yeah. So Kurt, let's start with this conference. The name of it is Connect. Why do you feel like connection is important? Why has that been a theme for this time together?
Well, I think when we first were putting a user conference together 3 years ago, there's a lot that goes into planning, and you try to get a theme behind that user conference and really get, people behind it. And so and then you build the conference around that theme. And so we were working on that theme, and Kylie Peters.
Is it Peters? Are you sure?
Well, here's a funny story, actually. So I'm going to tell this story now because she's going to kill me because I did this on stage. And I announced her at the beginning. She's one of my favorite people. I've never met anybody in my life who has just got that level of positivity. She looks for the good in everything. She thinks about, the other people and the emotions of other people. I did this on stage when I was thanking her. But the funny part is that both Kylie and Jake work at our office, and I was the one who married them. So I actually got ordained as a minister so I could actually perform their wedding. And I can't ever move her name from Kylie Peters to Kylie Prophet for some reason. And so the fact that I'm the one that signed the wedding certificate and I can't get it to be Kylie Prophet, that's a little bit ridiculous. So back to Kylie and being one of my favorite people. So the conference, when we're trying to get that theme together, was really saying we connect data and we connect systems. And Kylie says, well, let's call it the Connect Conference. I was like, well, that's great. That's what we do. We connect data and we connect systems. And she says, no, we connect people. I was like, oh, yeah, we do that too. So that's where Connect came from 3 years ago. And so after that conference, we had 110 people attend that conference 3 years ago. And the amount of connections that were made and the relationships that were made, we still hear about them today. And with COVID over the last couple of years, it may have been even more beneficial because now here are people isolated and have relationships from a conference, from a group of their peers in the cage, vault, and audit areas. And so that really made a difference. This year, we're really excited to lean into that concept just a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And we really focused throughout this session. And I will say a lot of that was prepping for this session. Remember, we talked about putting some of those seeds into each one of the sessions. So we put a connect seed into each session and talked about not just the software, but how it impacts people and their jobs personally, not just, the technical things that go with that.
Yeah. So when we connect with software companies, SaaS, PaaS, whatever, right? The people that we intersect with in day-to-day life, oftentimes what we see is that there's a disconnect between people really focusing on the technology solution, but then saying, oh, well, people actually have to use this and people have to implement it, integrate it, all of these things. So I'm curious, for you as someone who's a, business owner of a technology company, like, what do you do to keep the people top of mind and to understand that like the people part of it, truly is a critical piece of your success and, in getting outcomes from your platform?
Well, so there's two people sides of that, right? There's our customer people side of that, and then there's the internal people side of it. And so it's been interesting over the last few years as we've grown, because when it was at first, there was a handful of us, and we grew to 8, we grew to 10, we grew to 12, right? But we were all in it together. Communication was not an issue. We were all in. We all had the same mission. There was no question about what we're doing. But as we're growing, we're learning too. We're learning that we've got to share that mission. We got to share that vision and that purpose with our employees so that they can really carry that on to our clients and to new employees. Somebody was explaining it to me the other day. They explained it like an anthill. So when you have a small company, you know what to do because you see what everybody else is doing around you. So when somebody joins, they don't have those questions. They don't have those learning experiences that they have to have. But as you get bigger and bigger, if they don't have that trail to follow to say, I know how to build this, and there's a disconnect anywhere in there, then you have to be a lot more intentional about how you're sharing those things and how you're explaining people to their role in that. And I think to Hannah's point during the conference is how we handle that with our employees is going to carry about how they handle that with our customers. And so I think we have to focus on our employees.
Yeah. Awesome. It's interesting thinking about your business as almost a case study here. You didn't sign up for this, so we'll see how far it goes. But, Chas, I know you shared in an earlier session about RSM's target operating system, which is a really cool model for what we usually call, continued business evolution, but really about transformation and not just surviving as a business and maintaining homeostasis, but really thriving. I'd love to hear more about kind of how does your team interface with organizations to move them kind of from that just status quo into a real transformation?
Yeah. And so I think a lot of it comes back to what's the motivation for an organization to make change. Mm-hmm. So whether it be implementing a system, whether it be making changes in their organizational model, process improvement changes, what's really the motivation? And it's usually not just transactional. It doesn't just stop with we want to do one thing better or two things better. It generally involves a larger initiative. And so we think about, and particularly in the theme of this conference and working closely with Kurt and his group, is that there could be an opportunity for a larger transformation. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the idea of how we help make a process more impactful across the entire function, across the entire organization. And we're thinking about all of the interdependencies, about the different players in the organization that may be impacted, thinking about how we put that together from a change management approach, and ultimately how we can have almost the end in mind before we start, mm-hmm. and that we're keeping objectives close and dear to what we're ultimately trying to measure, what we're ultimately trying to achieve. We're thinking about the impact of those that may be direct beneficiaries of the change, those that may be indirect beneficiaries, or at least just stakeholders that will be impacted, mm-hmm. and putting it at least in a framework where, as the process unwinds, that we're thinking about successful implementation, but we're also thinking about successful adoption, whether it be, again, through a system or a major process change.
Yeah. During the session earlier, Debbie, you shared about a story from when you were 8 around getting like perspective. And I feel like that connects to what Chas is sharing about this idea of having a larger perspective, a higher elevation. Would you mind just sharing that and maybe making that connection for us?
Of course not. So I happened to make my first airplane flight by myself when I was 8 years old. And what I noticed and was just in awe of is when you looked out the airplane window, the structure of the land and the patterns that you saw were just impossible to see from the ground. And you never would have seen them or noticed them had you not looked at it from that perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think that thought process has really stuck with me since I was 8 years old. And I think what's interesting and what I admire about what Kurt and them are doing at CCT is I've also always thought that software was a really great way to spread the culture of a company. Because just like he was talking about, as the company gets bigger, people can usually only make connections with about 150 people max. And after that, they become unknowable really in any depth. And so, but the way the software is designed, and I think their intention to actually improve people's lives, I came up through the finance side, and you will hear a lot of CFOs say, well, I don't care how late they work or what they have to do as long as I get my numbers. Okay. And that always struck me as wrong, because that tells you, right, well, I don't really care about my people, and we're not going to think about that with the software. But I hear Kurt and his team talk about people could go home on time. It made their lives easier. People were happier. And that tells people that your company cares about you, because you've made an intentional decision to work with companies who are intentional about how they make the software work. And in the product management meetings, they ask for, what can we do better? And so I love the intentionalness of what they're doing.
Yeah. And I love this idea of thinking about how a change project can improve the culture of an organization in ways that aren't even directly, at least that we would think, directly connected to that piece of software.
They're not in our project plan.
Right. Yeah. So we can do things as fundamental as build trust between two departments via a project. So I think for leaders listening, that's a great takeaway, is how do you build out a strong enough change management plan, a strong enough communications framework when you're doing a project, so that not only do you get ROI on the project, hopefully some financial return, hopefully some efficiency improvement, but you're also building a stronger team by doing work side by side in a collaborative way. So I'm curious, as I kind of share that out loud, what are some practical ways that really from anyone that you've seen where an organization made a change that on its surface was a process, a technology, right? But it ended up being a kind of a culture builder at the same time. Any stories come to mind?
I just think about the idea of I'll tell you several things come to mind of where we have seen change management done well, and maybe where change management could have done better. And Kurt talked a little bit about this, and this goes across several projects, but the one key ingredient ultimately that you'll see when it's done well is you have management ownership. And so this is even if you have a strong project management office, or if you have a strong project manager, that doesn't replace the important role that management plays in change management. Just the ability of whether they are physically there at all times through the darkest hours, or if they're there at the critical moments and saying, at least these are our objectives, if they're soliciting feedback, if they're using it as an opportunity to just take pulse and see how folks are doing. But management engagement is definitely one of the critical factors.
I think y'all talked about that during one of the breakout sessions, that a project manager is not a replacement for the manager being involved in the project, right? So it's two different pieces, and it doesn't have to be the same level of involvement, but it can be very supportive for their team, understanding what they're going through. And we get that confusion a lot when we're talking to customers about, this is what a successful project looks like. And we have a great project management office. And it's like, I'm sure you do, but there are still expectations that, your team has of you to be involved in this process as well.
Yeah, and that leadership presence is what matters here, right? And we talk about leadership presence in different ways. We've shared about the service profit model on this podcast before, where profit is an outcome of a chain of events. And one of the things that we didn't really touch on in our session earlier in the panel, but it's this idea that if you as a leader focus on that first part of the service profit chain, the shared purpose, the employee experience that then has an engagement outcome, that is a transformational leadership presence that just sends energy down the entire chain, right? Debbie, you talk about energy, and I'd love to hear your idea of that as well, how you talk about currency in terms of energy. But the way I think about this and how we talk about it is, as a leader, if you focus your attention, where attention goes, energy flows, right? If you focus your attention on that part of the chain of that internal service quality for the employees, you are building energy that's going to have exponential returns down the chain. So instead of focusing the energy on staring at the number, the outcome, right, and wishing it to grow, or focusing on any of the technicals of the project, right? Because we have technical experts that are part of the project, where the leadership presence has a bigger impact is if you focus on what is that experience, what is the culture, how do we build a culture of change, how do we support people in a way that helps bring out the best in them and make them want to perform their best work.
So I guess what comes to my mind is, whenever you're doing a new project, it's almost always fraught with risk. Okay, there's a lot on the line. Some projects are riskier than others, depending on how big the change is going to be. So you both talked about the importance of management involvement. And when we do these project plans, yes, we need strong project managers, but I think the stakeholders sometimes feel like they are just there as a namesake. And those stakeholders are the ones who really have to step up and say, this one's on me. If it fails, the buck's going to stop here. I believe in it, and I'm going to get involved whenever we get stuck or people get fearful, because in order to take risk, you have to feel safe. And so the role of the stakeholders is really just to step in and be the safety valve and the one that says, I got your back, we're going to do this. And what I think Hannah's alluding to earlier is I had told her a story that I'm a fan of traditional Chinese medicine, and one of the concepts of that is that we have these meridians with which energy or qi flows in our bodies. And when you have strong qi, you have a lot of energy and strength and ability to get things done. And when you get blockages, you get disease or dis-ease, right? And so I think about organizations in the same way. When people are seen, they're communicated to, they're valued, everybody feels good, right? And that good feeling just creates energy. At Harrah's, we used to have a saying, our employees are the face or the mirror of our customers. Right. And when those two look good together, everything's working great. And it's the same way when you're managing people. And so I think that brings the energy up as opposed to bringing it down. And then you're in a fun, lively, great place to work.
As Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, wrote, emotion is energy in motion. Yes. And I like to think of it too, and Kurt, we banter about, all we do is talk about feelings, right? Which isn't actually true, but it is true that for human motivation, everything we do is impacted by emotion. What we do and what we don't do. And now we can manage that and we can override emotional impulses, but having part of emotional intelligence is that awareness of my own emotional state and how it impacts other people. I like to think of emotion as information because it tells me something. What is it that I can learn? What is it telling me to pay attention to?
Well, I think as a culture too, we've decided that anxiety is a bad thing. And if you think about it, anxiety is telling you that, to your point, that there may be risk. And so it's meant to tell us, let's think about how we're going to mitigate that risk. So if you're going into something and you're a leader, you're a manager, and it's anxiety provoking, that is your natural response to say, how are we going to mitigate this risk? How am I going to lessen this anxiety? And that usually means let's start thinking about what's our plan? What's our approach?
Yeah, so this is sparking for me just another statement that you made earlier, Debbie, about ideas don't turn into action without connection. Like they die if there isn't enough connection and trust to enable that action or that idea to turn into action. I mean, share a little bit more about that.
Well, the story that comes to mind is I think I brought up I've had a long career, and instead of just going up the same vertical ladder, I've jumped around. And so I've gotten a lot of different perspectives. And so one of the jobs I had where I just left what I was doing before, which was being a CFO or a CIO and working as an executive in a gaming company, was to go to work for a software company and create their hospitality sales team. And the way software industry works normally is everything is a regional by regions because it's much more cost effective. And my premise was, if we're going to do this, we need to be vertically focused on an industry. And that was very disruptive to the rest of the organization to allow that, because it was expensive to fly us all over the country and then eventually around the world. But when we were creating that, I said, okay, I got my little team together. None of us had ever worked together before. And we're like, okay, well, what's our story? What are we going to say when we go out to talk to customers? What makes this difference? And so working as a team to develop that story that we all believed in. And then we went out on the road and we not only sold the story, but we got the company to deliver on the story. And it was uniquely fashioned so that it made people in the hospitality industry more successful in implementing the software because we put real value behind it. And I had the best time of my life working that 10 years with a wonderful team and great customers and kind of a similar environment to what Kurt has created today with CCT. He's solved a problem no one else has solved in the industry.
Yeah. So let me ask you all this, because we have some awesome experience just sitting at the table here as former CFOs and everything that you guys have done, right? So if we were to ask a typical executive leadership team, is everyone on this team reading from the same story? Does everyone share the same narrative? Do we all use the same words when we explain to our teams or stakeholders, customers, to our board, why we're doing what we're doing? I think most of the time, if people answered honestly, we would see that there is an alignment around one shared story. Why is that? Why do you think people have a hard time reading from the same story as a leadership team? And for the ones who get it right, what's their key to success?
That was a long question.
That's a hard.
Let's go at it.
4 questions in one.
Well, not to monopolize it, but I do have a story on that. I think it boils down to sometimes ego. I had a really difficult time one time because we were trying to do an expansion to one of our properties, and it was kind of tricky in terms of the strategy behind it. But I had built the strategy and delivered it, and then my boss got up in the board meeting, big fancy board meeting with everybody around it, and started saying, well, all we really need is a big sign. and I'm like, no, that's not the strategy. And I'm sitting in the room going, he's going to lose my project. It's like we had this all built. And all the board members wanted the project to go forward, but of course, the chairman called him out and said, well, then why are you expanding the building if all you need is a big sign? And they kind of got into a little bit of a tete-a-tete about it, and nobody was backing down. And I finally had to just get up and go, well, what I think he really means is this. And they just wanted someone to step into the middle because everyone wanted the project to go forward, but sometimes people get in their own way.
Well, I think, to play right off of that, you say ego, and I say mutual respect is on the other side of that spectrum, right? And just speaking from our team, and we're a close-knit team with our leadership team, but what you said on stage today, there's team 1 and there's team 2, right? And so understanding that team 2 is very important, but team 1 has to have perfect alignment. And that perfect alignment can only come with mutual respect, right? Because if you don't have that, then you're going to walk out of that room, you're going to go share a message, you're going to dissent from what the top of the organization is doing. And then once there's dissent in one leg of that organization, now you're breaking down the entire process. So it sounds selfish sometimes to say, well, I'm fighting for my team. That's great. But here we're on this team and we're going to walk away and we're all going to walk out and share the same thing. But again, it has to start with that mutual respect of I'm willing to listen to you, you're willing to listen to me, and we're going to walk out of here. And we may disagree, but we're going to agree with how we move forward. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And so I think it aligns perfectly with what you're saying. I think it's just the other end of the spectrum.
That's true. Yeah.
And I think I would take it a little bit of a different direction too, is that we oftentimes will think of an organization at the macro level having a purpose and a mission. But it's really important when you talk about referencing being a CFO or leading an accounting function, or if you're leading a marketing function, whatever is your domain, what's your mission within your function? How does it play to the larger mission? But you also have your own initiatives, you have your own vision, and you have to turn around and say, how does that translate to what are our key objectives? But you have to be deliberate in being able to say, does everyone on my team understand that? Because if you just take it for granted that we know what our mission is, there may be folks that don't get it. For example, if we talk about the finance function, and I was thinking about this when you were talking about your service supply or your service profit model of ultimately how that impacts profit. That's the same for those functions that are also what we would maybe call back of house, or those support departments. They have internal customers. It all fits into that same model as well. And you got to make sure that we all understand what that purpose and that mission is.
I think you're so right. Internal customers they really don't get thought about. And being able to tell the accounting department, all of those different department managers who are looking to you to get their financial statements out timely and tell them how they did, you are a service, you have internal customers, and that's a really important thing and often gets overlooked.
Well, and the reliability aspect of it, it's not just the getting it done, but can you get it done? Can you get it where it's done accurate, it's reliable, it's timely? Because these are the things, these are the basis, they're used for the basis of decision making that ultimately will impact the entire organization.
I'll go back to your perspective from just a second. It is hard, and I think we need to address, why are these things not happening? I think we could sit down with a lot of leaders and they would in concept agree, yes, I understand, I agree, that's the way it is. But they're traveling leadership teams. They're all on different wavelengths. There are tons of things that have to be happening. And sometimes it is hard to step out of, I'm in the middle of it. I have to finish this. I don't have time to go back and focus on that right now, even though I know it's the right thing to do. And so finding that opportunity, the thing I would say that on the flip side of that is, and as a growing company, we're learning some of these things as we go along. We're learning we need to pay more attention to these things. We need to focus in on more of these areas. So I won't talk about clients or anything from that perspective, but even looking internally at what we've gone through, it is saying, all right, well, if we don't stop and we don't look, it's going to fall apart, and it's going to force us to stop and look. And, luckily we've been learning these lessons as we go along, and we have a core group of people who are still very outspoken, and they let us know how they feel. And at first that hurts a little bit. It stings like, then you step back and you're like, okay, I got to take this the right way. This was positive feedback and I need to go do something with it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hear all these stories, and to me, it goes back to like life is an exercise in priorities. And as a leader, like leadership is an exercise in priorities, right? We know that we just have to get shit done sometimes. And if we have a deliverable and the deadline's coming up, like, yes, those things take priority. But I think where people fall down as leaders and as senior leadership teams is when their priorities don't change as they're elevated throughout the organization. And so we forget, maybe forget's the wrong word. Sometimes we fail to learn, or no one has taught us, or no one's even expecting us to shift our priorities and shift our focus as we move into these different roles.
So I take it for granted because we just finished the conference and we had a conversation. So I'm trying to remember, was that already said here or was that said there? So you'll have to forgive me. But so one of the stories that we started the last panel with was the fact that we've done about 200 installs of the software. And we've done a number of projects, a number of upgrades. And as we're going, we're learning and we're trying to get better about how we address it and how we do things. But of course, we're a software company. We're a technology company. So what do we look at? We look at process, what's going on, how's the software working, is it functioning correctly? But really, once you get on site, it's about training people and the individuals and getting the buy-in. And so the story was that the number one thing, that overriding thing that impacts installs and the quality and success of an install is the involvement of the stakeholder in the project, right? And so you get back to, and so I was just thinking while you were saying that, because yes, does that take time out of your day to go and sit with somebody, to go and learn, to go and see? But how much dog food are you going to eat if you don't, right? It's going to take time out of tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and you're going to have your employees upset and suffering. You're going to have a project that wasn't as successful if you wanted to. So maybe that's a point that when they're taking on projects, stepping back and looking at it and saying, all right, what is this going to need from me, and can I give it right now? So there's so many initiatives running on. So maybe there's another checkbox before you start a project. Of what does it need from me? And if I can't give what it needs from me, maybe I should stay away from it.
Well, and the impact of that, whether it be good or bad, is not short term, it's long term. And so making that investment at the front end is huge in paying of dividends on the back end. Because you think about it, again, whether it be organizational change, whether it be system change, you will create culture one way or the other. And so is it the culture that you want to create, or is it a culture that you want, that someone will have to ultimately unwind one of these days?
Absolutely. If you're not intentional about creating culture, culture happens, and it may not be the culture you want. And that's, and that's a lot of the work that we do with organizations is, how do we take what made this company great to begin with, or what was that secret sauce, whether it was the founder's beliefs or the way the organization came together, and how do we codify that? How do we get explicit about what are those values? But we don't talk that much about values. We talk about commitments. So if you identify your values, what are the behavioral commitments that we agree to showing up as an organization? What are those commitments that will actually operationalize the values? And how do we operationalize that purpose? And yeah, I think there's a lot of threads we could pull on that. And that's one of the, what I have really appreciated about getting to know the three of you guys as in this process of preparing for our panel session, looking at, we have all these different perspectives, right? But we deal with we work on the same problems or the same challenges, but from different angles, from different perspectives.
Well, going back to the point of the panel, right? So when we first started putting this panel together, it was really, we needed to wrap up this conference, and we were focused on the connections and the data and all of those types of things. And it goes back to the reason that Hannah's on the panel with us is, no, there needs to be a people component to connecting these things. And, for a process-oriented kind of guy, that's tough for me sometimes to go, wait, what are we talking about? We just need to make the system better. But then I turn around in the same breath and say, the most important thing about an install is the involvement of the management team. That is a people issue. That is not a process issue. And getting that buy-in from those teams. And so putting that together, when you talk about perspectives, that's, we were trying to put together the systems perspectives, the operational perspectives, and the people perspective of it. And we have had 3 prep sessions before we got into today. And I can tell you now we've had the actual session, and now we're having this conversation. There have been 5 very different, very good conversations because we never know where we're going to go.
Well, and that's the magic, right? Why our podcast is called Magic in the Room. It's what happens when you put people together in the same room and they connect over a shared purpose. And we had a shared purpose, and we've made the connection, and I think there's magic that comes from that.
Well, and I think it shows the value, even going back to the conference this week, is you can see what happens when you get leaders in a room together that have common purpose or common values or living through some of the same challenges, that it's just instinctive to see how they start communicating, networking, and identifying solutions. And it's, we're in a world, and have been for the last couple of years, where we've started, kind of distancing folks, and we maintain this distance. And you can see now how everybody was craving and looking forward to these opportunities to reconnect. And I don't want to beat up your conference name. The pun is just too easy. But
it is. It's way too easy.
People were
almost
hungry
wear
for
it out over
Yeah.
the whole week. I think we've just literally beat it up at this point. But I'm wondering, I want to really get some feedback, because when you do that, but it's a word that can be used in so many different ways, in all the different ways that we're talking about here. So when you're doing it, just kind of naturally flows as part of the conversation.
Leaders need a forum to connect, and there needs to be an opportunity. There's times that can be kind of lonely and at the top or wherever they are in that structure, and knowing that there is a network for those that they can reach out, and it's pretty valuable.
But I think what you were talking about energy, and I think with this, all the few years we've been through, everyone's really hungry to be in a room together where you can feel the human energy of another person that you connect with and relate to and go, oh yes. And I was reminded of something listening to you talk about pulling on the threads. I know, and you were talking about life is a lesson in of priorities. Thank you for that. And I remember when I worked at Harrah's, I noticed that it's very hard with the GMs, and it was just that each of them have their own personality, and the personality of that GM had to actually be matched with the personality of the property that they ran. Because if they didn't match, so you couldn't have somebody who was good at cost cutting run a high-end property, because he could just never imagine spending that much on marketing or this kind of event,
Can't
right?
save your way to revenue.
Right. But so if he was going to run a luxury property, he kind of had to wear he had to have that demeanor. And it was a really interesting observation to watch that, oh, wait a minute, that's never going to work, or just the match of the personalities to the organization that they ran.
Yeah. So that's a great point. And the fact that you were able to observe that, I think shows, one, a perceptiveness about human behavior that I think is common to folks who move into leadership roles. And so we're sitting here and we're talking about all of these kind of leadership principles, and well, how do you lead complicated projects, and how do you grow? And, Kurt, why are we doing a conference about connection when there's a technology is the offering? And I think it all kind of brings me to this question around all of you, and I'm going to include Hannah in this because you were in technical sales, right? Before, and kind of in your first career. How did you all come to a place where you realized that technical proficiency in your trade, right? Finance, accounting, audit, whatever it is, technical sales. Where did you come to a point where you realized, well, just being the best at that thing is not enough? And I have to be a generalist on some level and understand every part of an operation to lead effectively. And it matters how I speak, how I message things, how I show up to my team in a room, the energy that I bring. How did you make that shift? Was it easy for you? Was it hard for you? And maybe where are you on that journey now? Because I think it is a journey.
So I do have a story about that. When I first got into technology sales, my first career was in, or maybe second career. I think I'm on my third career now. I'm not sure. I've also wandered
We have that in common.
Yeah,
Yes.
me too. So I came into telecommunications not knowing anything about telecommunications. I started in sales because I knew that it would be the best place to learn how the company makes money, who the customers are, what they bought from us, and why they bought from us, right? And what I really wanted to do, I had recognized that I liked sales because I love working with people, but I wanted to work with people in a different capacity. I wanted to help people connect with, I didn't use the word purpose back then, but that's really what it was, right? To help them unlock the greatness that's innate in them and to be the best they can be. And so I thought, okay, maybe I can do this as a corporate trainer, but I also realized pretty quickly that I wasn't going to get a job as a corporate trainer in a new industry without any industry experience, right? So where do you learn how an industry works. Well, you work with customers and you work with the revenue, and you learn where the money goes and how the company grows, right? So that was kind of the idea. So when I got into my job, the first thing I learned was how to use a quoting system. And I was told that I had to configure access first because that's just how the system worked. I had no idea what access was. I had no idea what I was actually quoting. I was learning a system, how to use a system, without understanding what that system actually did. And it took me about 2 years. So I kind of eventually got on this quest to figure out the puzzle of how all the pieces work together. And it took me a year to get comfortable and effective. And it took me 2 years to fully understand the ecosystem of, what I was selling and how what I did started as an inside salesperson on the phone with a customer selling the circuit. How did that turn into money, into an installed service? And so I started just and I like solving puzzles, right? So it became like a puzzle for me. And once I had that experience of, okay, I didn't know what I didn't know. Now I know. And, what I did later on at that company, I had an opportunity actually relatively quickly to move into the training department and built a college hire program where we would hire recent college grads from all over the country. They would come to our headquarter location for 3 months, go through this training program. But we taught them the ecosystem. We taught them how all the pieces fit together. We taught them how their role impacted the big picture. And it became a much more effective model because I learned from having a difficult time getting the full picture, right? And so teaching, rather than just the technicals of the job, we taught kind of the bigger picture of the revenue model and how the company actually generated income.
Yeah. And I think of coming back to the way that you pose the question for leaders is that successful leadership is multifaceted and it's multidimensional. It may very well have its base at having a strong technical understanding in your particular area, whether it be finance, whether it be technology. It generally is going to start with having a technical understanding and being proficient at it. But regardless of level, to lead others, you also have to be able to have other dimensions on top of that. That's the ability to have empathy. It's the ability to have the understanding of what's going on. I thought you did a great job today in bringing out the point when we were talking about communication of the ownership responsibility of understanding how to communicate to someone, and that it's not on them to have to flex to someone else's style, but really the person that's trying to convey that message, they need to flex to the receiver's style. And just being able to start to build what maybe their soft skills, but their critical leadership skills. And so I just see it as, in my mind, I see this picture of it's all just multidimensional. It very much may sit on top of a base of having a strong technical understanding in your respective role, but you have to have these other elements as well to really be effective.
So I'm laughing because you're reminding me of a story. So when I made the transition from being a CPA and going to work at Harris, I had a staff of 19 basically bookkeepers and accounting managers that reported to me, and it was my first job with supervising people, right? And I'd never done that before, and so of course I wanted to have a really happy, content workforce. I wanted everyone to be happy, right? And I did my best to make everybody happy. And it was just impossible because they were all older than I was, all resentful that I was younger and had come in, and they didn't whatever happened in their life, they didn't get an accounting degree, they hadn't finished college, they had all these issues. And finally one day I realized I can't be their friend, I can't make them happy. And so I had to call them in, and I had to use a different form of communication besides being a nice person and basically say, look, it's not my job to make you happy. Happiness is on you, and whatever you're unhappy about, you got to solve that yourself. What I can offer is a fair, clear workplace where what I need you to do is clear, my expectations are clear, and and above that, I can't handle the rest of it for you, right? That's on you. And I did it as nicely as I could. And after that day, we had a different environment. Yeah. But yeah, so you do have to change and adapt, and sometimes, it can be hard. You have to go, okay, I don't get to be the nice guy anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember too, especially for people who are trying to make that transition into a leadership role, that it is a learned behavior, right? And that's especially true for me. I've done tons of these personality assessments. I mean, they don't say nice things, basically. They say you only care about the process, you only care about the facts, you're not sensitive to people things, you have no empathy. And so, but I also understand it's important. Like we built off of solving a problem and customer service, like customer facing, very much so. And when we had that core team, it wasn't all about that because we were in it together. But as the team has grown, and I haven't had the empathy, but I have had the dedication to my employees, right? Like they know that I care. They know that I'll do anything for them anytime. They know that part, right? So, but there's still more to that. And one of the things as you're talking about the experience that you guys have, and you go in, you work with management teams. The last 4 years, I've been in a peer group, a CEO peer group, and I tell you, 70% of the content of this peer group is people, and the HR side and the developing the purpose side and sharing the vision and working. It's that we did. I said, I'm going to join the CEO peer group and the business owners, and I'm going to get to sit down and we're going to talk shop. I mean, how do you grow the business? How do we set targets? How do you move towards those targets? Almost none. Right. And so I am a work in progress still. And I think some people may even say I'm being turned into an experiment. And but it's great, right? But it's also hard. We talked about where do you get your energy from, and you're either giving it or, and so some things give you energy and some things take it away. You got to teach me how to get it back. Yeah. We'll go over that later. Right. But so doing that, and because if it's not your natural state and it's not what you are naturally talented at, you are actually taking energy, and you still have to, right? So being an expert in an area and really understanding the business and what's going on, yes, that's super important, but that doesn't get people to follow you. That doesn't, that doesn't get you where you need to be as a leader. And so the point being that I'm not there yet, and I probably won't be there. It's probably a long curve, but it is something. It's a learned behavior.
Yeah.
I was going to say the other thing I think as a leader that's really important is you have to be observant about your team and look at the mix and match of skills. And you have to be honest with what are your own strengths and weaknesses, and how does your team supplement those and make a stronger team. And I know when I first had to transition to sales, it was very hard for me in my brain because I was like, I'm not a salesperson. I am not a salesperson, right? And how can I do this? But then I realized, well, this is okay. This is something I believe in. So I'm not really selling. I'm just telling people what I truly, honestly believe. But if you've ever managed a sales team, you have to be very careful about the sales commission plans, because salesmen will figure out how to maximize it for them and not for the company, right? But I noticed I was very lucky. I had some amazing sales guys that worked for me, but one of them was a relationship guy, but he didn't like to close because that was really hard because it was going to push the relationship, right? Yeah. And the other one wasn't great on the relationship, but he would close. Yeah. And so I had to manage them very differently, but it was great because they had those two skills and I didn't have those, right? And so recognizing those things and using them to your advantage, I think, is an important thing a leader needs to do in whatever role they're in.
Well, and it's a different concept than managing weaknesses. Managing strengths is very different, and that and that's not my concept. I mean, we subscribe to this in our group of our team and we'll utilize strength finders as a way to identify what maybe our inherent strengths are. And I think sometimes our inclination is let's focus on the weaknesses so we can build those up. The reality is we can be so much more impactful by just focusing on the strengths.
Exactly. And that goes back to the energy management, right? And I like to I don't even talk about time management anymore. I talk about energy management. And when we focus on strengths, it is much more efficient use of energy than when you focus on weaknesses. And that's the power of a team, right? Because your two guys had skills that you didn't have. That means you didn't have to work so hard at building those strengths because they were already on the team. Right. And you could leverage the team to achieve what needed to be done.
Well, to your point, you're absolutely right. And I subscribe wholly to the strength finders and focusing on your strengths, but there's a flip side of being aware of your own weaknesses, right? Sure. And so I don't, aware of others, sure, but it's easier when you're managing to manage their strengths and really put them in a spot where they're going to be successful and understand who they are. But as you are moving into a management role, and some of those younger people are moving into management roles, they can focus on their strengths, but they need to be aware of their weaknesses because they need to surround themselves with, people who have those, strengths that they don't.
Well, and I kind of laughed when you talked about your dynamics of being kind of a process guy. And I mean, this is why Kurt and I get along so well. And I know for me that a lot of times I need someone else on my team to be able to tell me what I didn't hear. It was very plain. Someone communicated it to me, but I didn't hear it.
Yep.
And so I just know that there's those elements that I miss because it's not a strength for me sometimes to understand maybe if there are, some emotions that are involved in something that may not be my natural cue to pick up on that.
I love that. I look at people though, and I'm like, it's so easy for me to be like, look at that. I respect that about them. It's easy if you're looking for it to find, like, I think I could take strength finders. I think I could do everybody on my leadership team on the strength finders, and I think I could get almost close. Oh, yeah. Right? Because, you work with them, you realize what those things are, and you're spending time, and you're putting them in that spot that they can be successful. Yeah, I made the joke on stage, our COO, Danny Rowe, he is a very organization guy, but, one of his strengths on strength finders was basically that it was like, it's not steady, but basically, you're constant, right?
Deliberativeness.
Yeah, and so, but every one of his was like almost in that same boat. Like he's got to get process put back into it. And for him, like I'm probably a disaster, right? Because he's an organizational process guy, but and I guess I fall more on the innovative side, like just creating stuff and throwing it in there. So organizational process is his thing. Business process is my thing. Like I'm looking at an outside business, our customer's business, being like more efficient. How can we do it? And he's looking at ours saying, now how can we deliver this to our customers consistently and be efficient internally? So when I say I'm a process guy, there's two different types of processes, like one internal facing, external facing. So, but I think that it's almost fun to sit there and try to find, somebody else's strengths and be like, not in a manipulative way, but how could I use that? How could I put that to work? Because like you said, them works no longer work. And so I've never thought of it in terms of energy instead of time, but that's what you're giving, because you give me something I don't want to do and I got to do it for 10 hours. I just worked a 50-hour week.
Yes, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, amazing feedback here and conversation. And for listeners, what I'm hearing, and I just want to say this out loud, is if you're someone who you're on a leadership journey or you're interested in becoming a leader, what I don't hear in any of these experiences of leadership at the table is a sense of entitlement. Rather, I hear a sense of stewardship, responsibility, curiosity, a willingness to do work, to grow. And so I think if I was going to take anything away from this for me, and it's a great reminder for me as well, how do I look at myself, my strengths, my areas to grow, and really steward my own leadership journey and skills as I move forward? And so for the interest of time, I have like 5 other things here starred that you guys said on the panel earlier. No, I just want to dig into all of this.
We just made sure you guys back on the podcast.
Right. There's lots of stuff that we could talk about, but I want to wrap us up. And what I'd love to hear is from everyone at the table, what's the superpower of your team? What's the thing that your team does best in the world? And then how can people get a hold of you, reach out, connect? So Kurt, you want to start us?
Well, I think that's a pretty simple answer for me, and it is what has allowed us to be successful. We get engaged with the client, we go sit with them, we experience their pain, we understand what's causing their frustrations, and we solve their problems. A lot of times the clients don't understand what the right solution is, and they don't know what's possible. And I had this at the beginning of my software career when I was like, I didn't even know that you could do that. And so there's that saying that they say, like, if you'd asked people what they wanted, they said they wanted a faster horse and buggy, right? They wouldn't have thought cars, and they wouldn't have thought planes. And so you just go understand and experience their problem, and then you follow that up with the customer service. And we have, I believe, made our brand off of the way we treat our customers in an industry that I don't think typically has the highest level of customer service from their vendors. Yeah. And so we turn that into our brand, and you got to really focus on that if you're going to say that, right? And so it is something that we track constantly, and I think that's our superpower.
Yeah. And how would people connect with you?
Casino Cash Trac without a K.com. Yeah. And we have a Chief Revenue Officer. His name is Venora Franca. And if you go to the website, there's a chat right there where you can reach out to our Director of Marketing, Kylie Profit.
All right.
You redeem. If she listened an
Kylie
hour
listens
in,
every week, so
right?
I think she's
so
in.
Kylie, it paid
It
off.
may actually be this podcast that led to us meeting, because Kylie had been a listener, and I think that's how she introduced the two of us.
It's hilarious. See, connections, new friends. Can I be in your circle of 150 people?
Yes, you may. You already are.
All right, Chas, tell us about your team and how to connect with you.
So I would say that I would come back to RSM's motto, which I think says a lot for us. So we say that we understand the power of being understood. And that's not the clients understanding us, but that's the fact that we work our best to understand our clients. And saying it another way is that it's never we go in with solutions just ready to throw at our clients, but it's really trying to understand the challenges that they're working through, what's going on in their world at that time, and seeking to understand how we can help them find solutions. And that could be a myriad of possibilities, but that I would say that that's our superpower, is that we go in without thinking that we know the answer, but really listening to our clients, and then we sit down to figure out what the right solutions are.
Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome.
And how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so for connecting with me, check out LinkedIn. So I am not a great social media guy, but that is the one forum where I do exist online. And then rsmus.com is the RSM website that has a lot of great industry information, talks about our auditing, our tax, and our consulting lines of business, and gives a lot of great information and contact information on how to get a hold of me and others in the firm.
Awesome.
Wow, superpower, huh?
Yeah, what's your superpower?
Well, I think my superpower is actually, a friend of mine told me this a long time ago, I organize everything. Okay, he goes, whether it's your family, your house, the work you do, I take chaos, and so I love to go into places where, it seems chaotic, and I just listen, and pretty soon the order becomes, it sort of just comes to me like, and so it's maybe just trying to help them make order out of the chaos, whether it's in the system selection or the design of their data or how their business fits together or strategy. I like it when it's chaotic, and maybe they just want some help. And I wouldn't have said that before, but yes, I thought about it. And I think the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. It's just Debbie Hawkins, spelled Debbie. And I live in Las Vegas, so easy to find.
Okay. And Hannah, how do people get a hold of us?
You can connect with us, as always, at purposeandperformancegroup.com or on any of the social media channels.
I don't think you should get off the hook. What's your superpower?
Luke didn't ask me that time.
Well, I was trying to save us time.
What is our superpower? We help organizations operationalize their purpose.
So, Kurt, thank you for hosting a great event. Thank you for, and I'll say this just really, I didn't think about this before, but the fact that there are experiences like what happened the last couple of days that both provide real technical, practical advice to folks for their functional roles, but also is a safe place for people to connect after a pretty traumatic couple of years, is really important. And I'm sure it makes sense for your business to do this, but I think it also really makes a positive impact in the lives of the couple hundred folks who were here. And so thank you for doing that. Thank you all for spending some time with us on Magic in the Room. And thank you so much for everyone who's listening. Hope you have a great day.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo, and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love, available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Story Catcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.